Who do you think you are? Your kind, a black piece of trash like you, deserves nothing but to be under my boot, the police officer roared, his boot heel grinding into the face of the female doctor, lying on the cold concrete floor of the parking garage. He sneered, stroking the grip of his pistol, believing that in this camera's blind spot, he was the law. He was God, the arbiter of life and death, for someone he considered a born criminal. But he made a fatal mistake when he ignored the military medic's ID tag lying next to the pool of blood. The woman, her breath shallow, still glared at him. "My husband will find you," he scoffed, utterly dismissive, unaware that her husband was Malik Jericho, a ghost of the Special Forces, a top-tier sniper trained to hunt targets in absolute silence. And the nightmare descended the very next night. A silent red laser dot appeared dead center on the officer's forehead, piercing the darkness like a judgment from hell. From an arrogant hunter, he suddenly became trembling prey before the barrel of a husband ready to burn down an entire city to exact justice for his wife. Can the lone gun of a soldier topple an entire corrupt police system? Or is this just the opening shot of a far more brutal underground war code, named Project Rise? If the person so brutally beaten was your dearest loved one, would you wait for the law? Or take matters into your own hands? Leave your answer below, and watch till the end. Because the truth about to be revealed will send shivers down your spine. Nyla left the staff room with heavy steps after 14 hours of non-stop patient care. The hallway was quiet, ceiling lights casting a pale glow onto the tiled floor that had grown used to the weary footsteps of night shifts. She just wanted to get to her car, take a breath, and drive straight home. As she pushed open the door to the garage, a wave of cold hit her, carrying the damp smell of concrete and gusts from the ventilation system that made her shiver not from fear, but exhaustion. The basement was large, but the neon lights flickered unevenly. Section B was noticeably darker, its lights blinking like they were underpowered. She didn't think much of it, just noted how off it felt compared to the other times she'd come down here. Nyla gripped her keys tightly and headed straight to her car. Her hand touched the door handle, and she was about to text Malik about the adoption paperwork when she instinctively glanced at the security camera. The red light blinked, displaying the words, "Maintenance mode." She frowned. This area rarely had the cameras down there, had been some thefts here at night before. At the security desk, the guard kept his face down, glued to his phone like he didn't want to meet her eyes. When Nyla asked, he replied flatly, "System's down. Tech's fixing it." His voice stiff and uninterested. The monitors inside the booth were completely off, and the radio was pushed to the side like he'd just turned down the volume so she wouldn't hear anything. She didn't have time to question it. Her exhaustion made her want to leave the basement as fast as possible. But after a few more steps, a cold feeling at the back of her neck made her stop. A shadow stood in the dim gap between two concrete pillars. Then another figure shifted beside it, as if they'd been waiting for her to step into the dimmest part of the light. Ramsey's voice cut through before the light hit his face. It wasn't a routine request. It was dry, clipped, a command thrown out just to provoke. He stepped closer, his frame casting a long shadow across the concrete. His face was pale under the cold light, his eyes squinting with a look that said he'd already sized her up. Morell moved slightly to the side, his shoulder turning to block the way out, his gaze fixed on Nyla. One hand hovered near his waist, not on his weapon, but close enough to make his message clear. She looked up and kept her voice calm. "I'm heading home. That's my car. I work here." Ramsey let out a dry laugh, not hiding his annoyance. "Sure you do." He glanced at her car and said, "Funny. Same model from a theft report tonight." He held out his hand. "Keys up. Don't get smart. All." Nyla took a deep breath to stop herself from reacting through her exhaustion. She handed over her hospital ID, her hand steady. Ramsey barely looked at it before letting it fall to the ground like it meant nothing. "Doc. Huh. That's cute." His tone shifted to a mocking drawl. Nyla bent down to pick up the card, forcing herself not to snap, because she understood this wasn't a procedural stop. This was one of those nights when two patrol officers were looking for a reason. "Let's see the rest," Morell said, his eyes scanning her with zero respect. Nyla pulled out her military ID. Ramsey squinted and gave a crooked smile. "Army medic!" "That's what you are." The sentence came out soaked in sarcasm, like she was bragging. He tilted his head and stared a second too long. "That makes you tougher than the usual crowd." "Or you think so?" Nyla replied flatly. "I serve. That's it." "Bach? Anende Roland System Papres." Ramsey raised his eyebrows. Tough talk for a medic. He took a half step closer. Dangerous mix. Soldier and attitude. "Folks like you start walking around dark garages, thinking you're equal." Morell smirked at that, like it was a joke. Ramsey kept going. "Bad idea. Real bad. People like you get bold, and bold gets messy." He looked over at Morell, as if confirming his own opinion. Nyla held his gaze, but inside, everything had gone tight. Ramsey's tone carried the same venom she'd heard patients describe in stories about racist cops. It wasn't loud or angry. It was that slow, practiced kind of hate, spoken by someone who'd done this too many times. She took half a step back, meaning to explain, but Ramsey cut her off. "Don't talk, just stand there." His eyes weren't on her ID or her paperwork. He looked at her with the kind of contempt that said he believed none of it was real. She stood still, the creeping sense growing that these two didn't care about checking a car. From start to finish, this was about power. Morell stepped forward half a pace, the squeak of his shoe dragging across the floor. His voice was low, but sharp. "We got a problem. And she looks like the kind of problem we don't want walking out." Ramsey glanced over and gave a slight nod, the kind of wordless agreement that didn't need explaining. He looked at her again. "Doc or not? You walk around here with that badge like it means something. It doesn't." His breath hit her straight in the face. "Not here. Obvious asked her." The words landed like a stone. Nyla gripped the key tightly, not to fight back, but to keep herself from shaking from exhaustion. She knew the situation was tipping in the worst possible direction. Right now, it wasn't the fatigue of a long shift that made her heartbeat spike. It was the way these two men were speaking, the exact tone she'd heard before from victims describing their attackers. Ramsey added, voice lower now, more vicious. "A medic roaming around at this hour. Looks bold to me. And bold folks, they end up with trouble." He dragged out the word trouble, like a warning that things could spiral out of control. Morell didn't move, but all the tension zeroed in on one thing. These two had picked a target, and the target was standing right in front of them. She wanted to leave, but the path out was blocked by the way the two officers stood. Her feet didn't move, not out of fear, but because she knew any motion could be read as defiance. And in a garage this dim, with the cameras off, the guard conveniently absent, there was nothing protecting her. No one said another word, but the air was thick with violence. Ramsey's breathing sounded like it was reaching for an excuse, waiting for one wrong word or one small move. The basement was so quiet she could hear the ventilation fans from far away. Nyla stood in the cross of two beams of light, realizing she was standing exactly where no one could see. A place people had long called by a very old, very real name. Dead Zone. Ramsey looked at Nyla's car like he had just discovered a prize. His eyes flicked around before he bent down to glance at the license plate. A careless move, but his voice was firm, like he was following a script already written in his head. "This car matches the description from a theft report tonight," he said without hesitation. The words hit the concrete floor with the weight of a pretext, not an actual inspection. Nyla recognized that tone, the same one patients used when recounting senseless traffic stops by police, always starting with a vague accusation and ending in cold steel cuffs. She stayed calm and answered flatly, "It's my car. I have full documentation." Ramsey snorted, tapping his fingers on the roof, like he was evaluating a toy that belonged to someone beneath him. Instead of asking any questions about the supposed theft report, he stepped back half a pace and glanced at Morel, a signal that needed no explanation. Morel immediately shifted forward, blocking the path by standing sideways, legs slightly apart, like he was locking down a suspect. His right hand hovered near his belt, not drawing his weapon, but close enough to intimidate. The air around the two men thickened, the way they could turn something routine into something suffocating. Nyla saw it clearly. This wasn't about a stolen vehicle, and it wasn't about duty. These two were running a familiar routine, using authority to build a scenario where they held all the power. One step back, one wrong tone from her, and they could spin it into resistance. "I have the documents right here," she said, pulling her wallet from her coat. Her hand shook slightly, not from fear, but from fatigue. She pulled out her vehicle registration, driver's license, and hospital ID. One by one, calm and deliberate. Ramsey didn't meet her eyes. He glanced at the papers like they were nothing, waving them off like they held no weight. He spoke before she could hand over the last one. "I don't believe you." His voice was quiet, but more poisonous than shouting. It wasn't an opinion, it was a statement of power. His belief, or lack of it, was all that mattered. Nyla answered in a steady, low voice. "You're breaking protocol. Run the plates." Ramsey squinted, then sneered, his tone turning sarcastic. "People like you always think you know the law. Read too much. Start believing you're special." Morel stayed silent, but his eyes were fixed on her hands. He added coldly, "She's nervous." "Look at her." Ramsey agreed with a fold of his arms and stared directly at Nyla. "You've said enough. Stolen or not, that's for us to decide. Papers like these? Anyone can print them." She looked down at the documents in her hand, items any normal person would believe were proof. But in the hands of these two, they meant nothing. Ramsey leaned further into his performance, voice flat but sharp. "Don't act so by the book. I've seen plenty like you." He hit the word "like," as if she were part of some group, not a person. Morel jerked his chin toward her and barked. "Show the rest," she replied. "I've given everything that's required." Ramsey let out a short, cutting laugh. "Required's what I say it is." The garage was so still that his voice echoed clearly, every syllable ringing out. Nyla tightened her grip on her wallet, silently calculating every second. In this kind of moment, any response could be twisted into defiance. She kept her voice level. "If you want to check something, do it the right way." "This isn't it." Ramsey raised his eyebrows. "You teaching me now?" He reached to his chest, the familiar cop motion of activating a body cam. He pressed a button, no sound. Pressed it again, still silent. "Battery's dead," he said flatly. Then he looked over at Morel, waiting to see if his camera worked. Morel tapped his own button, his face blank. "Mine too. Battery." Ramsey nodded like it was the most natural thing in the world. "See? Perfect timing." Nyla stared at the dead body cams in front of her. These two had appeared in a zone where the main cameras were down. Their body cams just happened to fail, and the security guard said the system was under maintenance. Everything lined up too neatly to be a coincidence. She looked straight into Ramsey's eyes, the truth hitting hard and sharp. They had prepared for this. Ramsey's voice came out soft, almost a whisper, but it tore through whatever calm she had left. "Looks like tonight's your lucky night." 18 Ive. The way he said lucky made it sound like a threat. Morel stood so squarely in the path that the light behind him only cast onto the far wall, his size becoming a towering shadow that blocked any exit. Everything in that garage revolved around one axis, and that axis was whatever these two men wanted. Nyla could feel the ground beneath her tightening, not because of the dark, but because she stood completely exposed, caught between two dead body cams in a space where every eye could turn away, and every word could be twisted. Ramsey leaned on the roof of her car, lowering his head closer. "So tell me," he said, "what exactly are you doing with this stolen car?" She answered with cold breath, "I already told you. It's mine." Ramsey gave a slow nod, his mouth tightening. "Then, it's gonna be a long night." The truth was plain now. They weren't here to verify anything. They wanted a reason, and that reason was standing right in front of them, in a basement, cut off from every watchful eye. Ramsey turned to look at Nyla, as if everything up to this point had just been a warm-up. His tone shifted completely into something bitter, that biting voice older white Americans used when they wanted to put someone down without ever raising it. "Now, be honest," he said, eyes trailing from her hair to her shoes, like he was scanning for a flaw. "Where'd you get this car? This neighborhood's not the kind of place for your type to be driving something that nice." Onkreis. The way he pressed on your type didn't need any more explanation. Morel let out a short laugh, the kind that comes from someone too used to moments like this. "Yeah, she fits the look," he added, half joking, half mocking. "Seen plenty just like her over by the east lot." Ramsey gave a slight nod, like it was a pattern written in stone. "They all say the same thing. It's mine. I work here." He mimicked Nyla's voice, deliberately flattening it to sound cheap and unconvincing. Nyla tightened her thighs, steadying her voice. "You say that like it costs you nothing." Ramsey looked her dead in the eye, mouth curling. "Thought about it plenty. You know exactly what kind of people I'm talking about." His eyes added the missing word, black. The garage was so quiet it was like sound had been sucked out. Morel took one step forward, hand brushing near his belt, giving Ramsey the cue to escalate. "Step back to the wall," he said. The words weren't loud, but they tightened the air. "Weapon check." Nyla looked down at her nurse's uniform, streaked with dried blood from the long shift. "Then back up. I'm in scrubs, and you're still saying weapon check." Morel didn't give her a second to explain. His boot slid half a step, cornering her into a stretch of wall lit just enough by flickering neon to show her face. "Rules apply to everyone," he said. The words sounded rehearsed, but the meaning was clearly aimed at her. Ramsey crossed his arms and watched with a look of smug satisfaction. "Put your hands where I can see, and don't breathe too hard." It sounded more like mockery than instruction. Nyla stepped toward the wall 1 foot at a time, tilting her head slightly, eyes never leaving the two men. Her breathing stayed steady just like the way she'd stood in front of panicked soldiers in combat zones, knowing that keeping her voice firm was the only way to keep control. Morel ran his hand from her shoulder to her hip, dragging the motion out on purpose. "No pockets big enough for a gun," he muttered, dismissive, then slid his hand toward her side. Nyla's voice cut in cold. "You don't need to do that. I've already explained." Ramsey stepped in closer at that. "Listen to her. She thinks her words carry weight." Their frustration with her composure was becoming clear. They wanted fear. They wanted her to crack. But Nyla stood still, hands placed exactly where they'd told her, not shaking, not begging, not pleading. She was just waiting for this moment to pass so she could leave the basement. That infuriated Ramsey. Her calmness felt like a slap to his ego. He was used to people flinching, folding. "Look at her," Morel said, still scanning inch by inch. "She thinks she's above all this." Ramsey gave a sharp laugh. "Yeah, attitudes all over her face. Nyla turned her head slowly and said, I've followed every instruction you gave. Don't project your attitude onto me. That sentence lit something behind Ramsey's eyes, like someone struck a match. He stepped in so close she could smell stale tobacco on his breath. You're talking too much. You think you're on our level, Nyla answered clearly. I think I'm a human being. The words weren't loud, but they were sharp, and they pushed Ramsey past the line he was barely holding. His hand jerked up in a reflex, honed by years of using violence to hide discomfort. The slap cracked the air dry, sharp, so loud it seemed to stun even the ventilation fans. Nyla's head snapped sideways, blood blooming from her lip as her balance faltered. Morell's hand gripped his belt tighter, eyes wide like he couldn't believe Ramsey actually did it. But Ramsey treated the blow like it was a statement of authority. Nyla steadied herself after a beat, one hand on the wall to regain her stance, eyes stinging from the impact but still locked forward. No lunging, no screaming, no breakdown, just a stare that cut deeper than any protest. The look of someone who'd seen worse on a battlefield and knew this slap was just cowardice dressed in a badge. Ramsey flicked the blood off his sleeve and said, "See what happens when you get smart." His voice dropped each word like ice on concrete. Nyla brushed the edge of her mouth, tasting the iron bloom of blood. Her head throbbed from the sudden strike, but her words came out crisp. "You're both crossing the line." Ramsey laughed, longer this time, like it was a dare. "Line? In this garage? No one's watching." His tone made Morell glance around, checking the shadows again, then nod slightly. No cameras, no witnesses, no alarms. Just them and Nyla, backed against the wall. Ramsey stepped back one pace, his voice darker. "Let's see how long that calm holds." The slap had opened a door that couldn't be shut. In the cold basement, with only 3 people and no oversight, everything had shifted into something Nyla understood too well. Something dangerous. What came next wasn't just a confrontation. It was the kind of moment many people never got to tell anyone about. Nyla had not even managed to push herself upright after the slap when Morell lunged with the force of someone far too familiar with sudden violence. He grabbed her wrist, twisted it, and slammed her down onto the cold concrete. The impact knocked the breath from her chest, her mind blanking for a beat. Morell drove his knee into her back, pressing hard enough to keep her pinned whether she resisted or not. The metal cuffs snapped shut around her left wrist with a sharp, hurried click. Then, her right wrist was yanked back at an angle that sent a bolt of pain through the joint. Nyla clenched her teeth against the tightening pressure. She had been injured on battlefields, had seen people break bones from mines, but being forced down by these 2 men through the weight of their authority brought a different kind of pain, one that strangled her breath with humiliation. Morell tightened the cuff another notch, the metal screeching against skin as her wrist reddened. He leaned close to her ear, breath hot and dry. "Don't struggle. The more you do, the tighter it gets." Nyla panted as her face was pressed to the floor, blood from her lip trailing down her chin, the taste of iron mixing with the damp smell of concrete. She tried to lift herself barely half an inch to breathe. But Morell pushed harder, his voice full of irritation. "Like resisting, huh? You think you're stronger than me." Ramsey circled around until his boots stopped beside her head. He crouched, staring at her face tilted against the ground with open contempt. "Thought if you acted calm I'd let you walk, huh?" He kicked at her wrist to see how she reacted, then gave a short, ugly laugh. "You think you're different." Nyla swallowed the pain shooting through her shoulder and answered with a strained voice. "You are breaking the law." Ramsey all but spat a laugh. "What law? Down here, we decide." He stood and nudged her wallet aside with his boot, like sweeping away trash. It flipped open and slid several feet away, her hospital badge skittering in another direction. Nyla turned her head toward the phone that had fallen from her pocket when Morell slammed her down. It was the only lifeline she had. She tried to shift her cuffed hands toward it, but Morel reacted instantly. He grabbed her hair and yanked her head back. "Stay down. Don't test your luck." End quote. Ramsey spotted the phone and signaled Morel. "I got it." He bent to pick it up, rolling it between his fingers like a toy. The screen glowed faintly from the impact, a thin crack running across the corner. His voice was almost casual. "Nice phone." Then he looked straight into Nyla's eyes, holding a small, cold smile. "Shame." He dropped the phone to the ground and drove his heel down hard. A sharp crack echoed as the glass shattered, pieces scattering under the dim lights. He stomped a second time, harder, bending the frame. Nyla turned her face away when fragments hit her cheek. But Ramsey watched his own act like he was completing a routine. "No calling anyone," he said in a steady, report-like tone. Nyla steadied her breath, her wrists burning under the cuffs as blood pooled. She grit out, "Why do that?" Ramsey gave a dry laugh. "Because, down here, your skin color won't save you." The quiet sentence dropped so heavily that even Morel paused for a heartbeat before narrowing his eyes, confirming what Ramsey had just thrown at her. Nyla tried to hold her head off the floor, though her body was weakening fast. She spoke slowly, each word pushed out with effort. "I work in this hospital. I save people." Ramsey leaned even lower, his neck nearly blocking her line of sight. "You can save whoever you want, but you can't save yourself from this." "It's place Forders." Morel pressed down harder, making her ribs flare with pain. She let out a small groan, her body unable to take much more, but her voice stayed clear enough. "What do you want?" Ramsey stood straight, resting a hand on the strap across his chest. His voice was calm, which made every word more chilling. "Want you to know your place." Morel's knee slid up toward her shoulder, blurring her vision. Her breath caught, her throat tightening under the pressure and the bite of the metal cuffs. A single thought flickered in her mind. Maybe someone would walk through the basement at this hour. But no footsteps came, no doors opened, no sign of anyone else. Ramsey crossed his arms, looking down at her. "Pretty smart. That nurse uniform make you think anyone's gonna take your side." Nyla forced out through broken breaths. "I am not who you think." Ramsey lowered his head, voice dropping. "Yeah, you're much more dangerous." And 7. Nyla shut her eyes for a second as nausea surged from being pinned too long. When she opened them again, Ramsey was closer. He crouched beside her head and whispered so quietly only she could hear, "Long night ahead. Save your strength." Her body started trembling lightly from the lack of oxygen. Her vision blurred, the lights flickering like waves. Morel kept all his weight on her back, unconcerned that her breathing had already grown uneven. She tried to move her lips to speak, but the words came out softer than she intended. "If you take it this far." The sentence cut off as Morel pushed her head down again. Each second made her heartbeat heavier. Ramsey leaned close to her ear once more. "Tell me, you still think you're tough?" Nyla opened her eyes one last time, staring at the concrete ceiling as if clinging to the only fixed point she had left. Then she whispered, barely there, "My husband will find you." "Is not Nastiv." Ramsey shot upright, laughing with a sharp, dismissive tilt of his head. But his laugh ended abruptly, when Nyla's body went slack under Morel's hands. Nyla's world dropped into darkness, sudden and cold, like the very basement where she fell. Malik had just silenced his phone when he heard the trembling voice of the staffer on duty. "Jericho. Your wife. You should come right now." No details, no explanation, only that one sentence, and it was enough to make him jump up as if someone had squeezed his chest tight. His jacket was still unzipped when he tore down the hospital hallway so fast a few people had to step aside. His shoes hammered the floor in hollow echoes, pulling along the ragged breaths of a man trying to outrun the worst thing his mind was already imagining. The ICU doors appeared ahead, the white light inside spilling out in a cold, indifferent glow. A doctor stood there, face heavy. Malik did not bother greeting him. He pushed out the words, clipped and sharp. "Where is my wife?" The doctor stepped aside and led him in. When Malik's eyes landed on Naila, something inside him cracked and went silent. She lay flat on the bed, hair fallen to one side, wrists bruised into deep red rings, lips split and swollen, a streak of dried blood down her cheek. White bandages wrapped her head, covering nearly half her hair. Her breathing was weak and uneven, the heart monitor beeping steady but soulless. Malik braced a hand on the bed's edge to stay upright, but his fingers slid along the cold steel as if he were touching the shape of his own fear. He tried to speak, but his voice came out raw. "What happened to her?" The doctor looked at him, choosing his words with caution. "She took severe blows to the head and chest. There are signs of intracranial pressure. We stabilized her for now, but we have to observe." The word observe felt to Malik like someone telling him to stand still while his world broke apart piece by piece. He stepped closer, bending over Naila's face. The bruises on her cheek looked like they had been stamped there by someone's hand. Her wrists were wrapped, but he could still see the red cuts left by cuffs. Malik placed his hand over hers. Her skin was colder than it should have been. He leaned down close, whispering, "Naila, it's me. Can you hear me?" She did not answer. Her eyelids twitched once, then fell still again. Malik swallowed hard. He had seen teammates hit by gunfire. He had held dying hands. He had pressed his own shirt against bleeding wounds in the dark of a forest, but he had never felt his knees threaten to give out the way they did now. He stood there, one hand gripping the bedrail so tightly his knuckles turned white. His mind fired off questions the doctor could not answer, and he was in no shape to put any of them together. The doctor added, "The impact to the head was strong enough to cause swelling. We relieved the pressure in time, but we need her to wake up." Malik stared straight into the doctor's eyes. "Who did this?" The doctor looked away. "I don't know." Security brought her in. They said, "She fell." The word "fell" crawled up Malik's spine like ice. He took a slow breath, pushing down the wave of rage rising in his chest, knowing that if he let it out now, he would hear nothing useful. He turned back to Naila and lightly touched the bandage on her head. "You said you were tired. You just wanted to go home. How did it come to this?" A soft step near the door made him look up. A middle-aged nurse stood there with a clipboard in her hands. Her eyes flicked from Malik to Naila's bandaged wrists. Her expression was different from everyone else's. The look of someone who knew the truth was darker than what was written in the chart. When the doctor left to arrange more tests, the nurse walked toward Malik. She did not speak right away, only studied his face long enough to be sure he was ready to hear something he would not want to hear. Malik stayed by the bed, holding Naila's hand. His eyes sharpened even though he tried to keep his voice steady. "What other injuries does she have?" "Ho-Ten." The nurse glanced around, subtly angling herself to block any view from outside. She lowered her voice to a near whisper. "Jericho." Malik looked up, his eyes like a blade drawn from its sheath. The nurse's voice dropped further. "You're not the first man to walk into ICU with a wife who's been beaten like this." Malik straightened, breath catching. "What do you mean?" She checked the door again, then spoke slowly to make sure every word reached him. "Those two men? They've done it before. In the same basement. The last time it was a young man. No one believed him. It's did." Malik barely moved, but his eyes shifted, the pain hardening into something cold. "Which two men?" The nurse answered at once. "Night shift cops. One tall with a heavy southern drawl, one with a buzz cut. They always use the excuse of checking vehicles." It was the sentence that slammed the coffin shut. Malik looked at Naila, then at the bruises on her wrists, already changing color. Under the pale ICU lights, They looked like evidence laid bare. The truth lined up in front of him, every detail locking into place with brutal clarity. The nurse spoke again, voice low. "I don't know what happened out there in the basement tonight, but I know one thing." She didn't fall. Malik looked at his unconscious wife. Her slow breaths brushed against the last warm part of him that still counted as calm. He squeezed her hand and spoke very quietly, but without a tremor. "Nyla, I hear you." It was not a threat. It was a vow born right at the edge between love and pain. Malik stood by Nyla's bedside a moment longer, then stepped out, carrying the weight of the entire room with him. As the ICU doors closed behind him, the pain on his face slowly disappeared, replaced by the silence honed over years in special operations. He didn't ask anyone anything else, didn't show emotion, didn't say what he was going to do. But every step he took carried the weight of a decision already made. He walked to the security desk and requested footage from the area near the garage. The guard's face changed the instant he saw Malik, fumbling so badly he dropped his pen. He stammered, "System's down. I can't access it." Malik didn't answer. He simply tilted his head and stared at the dark monitor. He said quietly, "Show me zones A and C." The guard hesitated a few seconds, then switched on the feeds that were still functioning. The screen lit up with footage of the east entrance, the hallway leading to the basement, and the junction between zones B and C. Malik watched for a long time, his gaze like a blade scanning each frame. To anyone else, it would look like a normal hospital feed. But Malik wasn't anyone else. He saw how one figure passed by and disappeared just at the edge of the camera's range. He noticed the blinking lights every time the camera swept toward Zone B, the way two frames jumped slightly instead of flowing smooth like they should. He pointed to a blind spot on the screen and asked, "How long has this area been off?" The guard swallowed and mumbled, "Just tonight. Tech said it's maintenance." Malik stared at him a second longer than necessary, weighing whether the man was lying or protecting someone. Finally, he said, "Pull the log. I want to see who went down there when the system was off." The guard hesitantly scrolled through the access list. On screen, a series of timestamps appeared, and in 2 consecutive entries were the names Ramsey and Morell. The timestamp matched the time Nyla ended her shift. Malik looked at those names, his expression shifting like the surface of a river when the wind flips. He said, "Show me the front gate cameras." The guard pulled up the exterior footage. Malik focused on the west exit, where a camera faced the employee lot. Ramsey appeared for a few seconds, speaking with Morell, then disappeared just as the camera panned away. Malik pieced the images together in his mind, like assembling the map of a battlefield. One, someone thought, was perfectly hidden, but revealed its flaws under the scrutiny of a man trained to survive by noticing everything. He straightened and said curtly, "I need the list of their recent interventions." The guard paled. "You don't have clearance to—" Malik cut him off with a voice that was almost gentle. "Do you want me to call the DOJ and have them ask instead?" The guard blanched, then pulled the internal records. A moment later, he turned the screen toward Malik, too shaken to meet his eyes. "Here. Everything they handled the past 3 months. Don Azadar A." Malik scanned each entry, his eyes stopping as a pattern emerged. Suspicious vehicle checks, approaching black individuals, suspicion of weapons, reports lacking evidence, body cams lost data. Entry after entry, with the same names Ramsey and Morell, and exactly 7 cases marked unresolved or no footage. Each line struck Malik like a hammer blow, forming a picture he hated to admit. A deliberate pattern of abuse of power, not some one-time mistake. He took a short breath and turned to the guard. "These 7 cases. Where are the victims?" The guard stammered, but said nothing. Malik searched the database himself. One name made him stop for several seconds. Jared Sloan. He tapped the contact number in the file and stepped into the hallway to make the call. The phone rang for a long time before someone picked up. The voice on the other end was rough and tired, like someone who carried something that never really went away. "Hello." "Who's this?" Malik answered plainly. "This is Malik Jericho. I need to talk to you about what happened to you 3 months ago." The line went quiet for a moment. Then Jared asked, softly, "Why are you looking for me?" Malik replied, "My wife's in the ICU. Same kind of injuries." That sentence changed the tone of the conversation immediately. Jared exhaled hard, then whispered, "Those two did it again." Malik asked, "What happened to you? Tell me." Ivot sighed. Jared hesitated, then his voice dropped low. "That night, they pulled me over with the same excuse. Car check. Personal check. I told them they had the wrong guy." Malik listened to each word flow into his ears, every one of them a mirror of what Nyla had just lived through. Jared continued, "I asked why. Ramsey shoved me against the wall and said, 'That.'" Malik asked, "Said what?" Jared paused for a few beats, then spoke in a voice that could no longer hide the bitterness. He said, "Black folks should know when to stay quiet." Those were his exact words. Malik closed his eyes for half a second. The last piece of the puzzle locked into place. This wasn't a moment of impulse. This was a belief, something Ramsey lived by and repeated with every victim like a dirty mantra of power. Jared added, "I filed a complaint, but they said the evidence wasn't enough. The camera was broken. I couldn't win." Malik asked, "Did anyone back you up?" "Agennity." Jared let out a tired laugh. "No one dared." "You've seen it. Those two treat the parking deck like it's their private land." Malik leaned against the wall, his hand clenched so tight the tendons rose under the skin. He looked down at his arm, and the years he spent as a recon soldier came rushing back like a current snapping through bone. He said to Jared, "I'm not letting this disappear. I'm going to dig out every piece." "Epribe." Jared stayed quiet for a moment, then said, "If you can do that, you'll be the first." Malik ended the call. In his mind, every bit of information lined up like a campaign map, disabled cameras timed with patrols, blind spots created on purpose, 7 victims, the same pattern, the same 2 names, the same sentence. He stood in the hospital hallway, white light casting sharp angles across his face. Anyone seeing him now would know he had entered a state he hadn't touched in years. But now, he had no other choice. Malik turned his head toward the ICU, where Nyla still lay, her injuries still raw. He walked that way, with slow, steady steps, not to ask the doctor anything else, but to see her one last time before leaving the hospital and beginning what he knew he had to do. In his mind, no other voices remained, only Nyla's. Right before she blacked out, a sentence spoken through pain and despair. And he knew he could not let that sentence fall into the void. Malik walked out of the hospital hallway with steps so heavy it felt like the ground had to carry the weight of his entire body. He had no sense of time anymore, only the lingering cold of Nyla's hand still etched into his palm. Every breath she had taken was still in his mind. Every bruise on her wrists felt embedded into his skin, even though he hadn't touched them. When he reached the main doors, he stopped for a few seconds, not to calm himself, but to stop himself from turning around, storming back into the ICU and destroying everything. The hospital parking lot sat behind a wall of glass. The overhead lights spilled onto the ground in scattered pools. Malik stepped down onto the pavement, scanning the area where, on most nights, a few people still passed through. Tonight, it was emptier than usual. He stood next to his car, leaning against the door, trying to turn the pieces over in his mind to figure out where to begin. A figure appeared in the distance, approaching with steady, even steps. They stopped a few meters away. Malik recognized the face immediately. A face that rarely showed emotion, but had appeared in a few classified briefings back when he was still in the military. "Agent Kessler," Malik said, his voice low and rough, pulled straight from the pain. Kessler stood there, a middle-aged woman with eyes that looked like they already knew the story before anyone told it. "I heard," she said. "Nyla Jericho, brought into the ICU at midnight." Malik gave a small nod. She stepped closer by half a step. "What are you going to do?" Malik didn't answer right away, trying to steady the storm building in his chest. He pulled out his phone, opened the photos he'd taken of Nyla's wounds, her wrists, her face. He held the phone up to Kessler. The glow of the screen lit her face. She looked at each bruise without blinking. She examined the red mark on Nyla's cheekbone, the deep cut along her wrist, and lingered longest on the white bandage wrapped around her head. When she finished, she shut off the screen and handed the phone back, her voice suddenly colder. "Do whatever you have to." The words hit Malik like a punch, not because they encouraged him, but because they gave permission. He looked at her, eyes dark like a stone sunk deep underwater. "You mean I can handle this my way?" Kessler didn't hesitate. "As long as you don't shoot anyone in front of me. Out there, I don't see anything." The space between them suddenly thickened. Malik felt the moment pulling him back to the years when his assignments never made it into official files. "If I go further than normal, will you cover me?" Kessler glanced up at a camera mounted on a lamppost and said, "That one's been broken for 2 weeks. No one's fixed it. I haven't asked them to." Malik understood. The final mental barrier dropped. Kessler opened her trunk, lifted a small hidden compartment, and pulled out a thin file folder bound with a rubber band. She handed it to him, their eyes locking for 1 second, long enough for Malik to know this file wasn't supposed to exist in the open. "You need to see this," Kessler said. Malik opened it on the spot, flipping to the first page. The header read, R7. Suspicious seizure ring. Malik frowned. "What is this?" Kessler leaned against her car. "An internal ring the DOJ's been tracking for a while. They've been using traffic stops to seize property illegally, then reselling it. The two who went after your wife, they might be tied to it. And not just tied to it, they've been doing it consistently." Malik skimmed through the contents. The notes referenced unauthorized vehicle seizures, corrupted body cam footage, copy-pasted incident reports. In the list of suspect officers, Ramsey and Morell were side by side. A note beside their names read, "Tends to target people of color, especially women or individuals traveling alone." Malik's chest tightened. Why hasn't the DOJ stepped in? Kessler looked toward the gate as if weighing her answer. "To take this whole ring down, we need solid evidence. And those two are smart. Body cams fail at the right moment. Basement cameras under maintenance exactly during their shifts. We don't have an official reason to arrest them." Malik's eyes sharpened. "You do now," Kessler answered quickly. "Only if you pull something clear. And to get that, you'll have to do things regular people can't." "Never." Malik paused. From the moment he stepped out of the ICU, he'd known he was going down this path. He just hadn't known where to begin. Now, everything was clearer. The file in his hands was a map, through the dark, showing the tunnels beneath a system that looked quiet from the surface. He folded the file and tucked it into his coat. "How far do you want me to go?" he asked. Kessler shrugged. "Far enough that I have a reason to send a team in. The rest is up to you." Her voice dropped. "I've seen a lot of people like you. People who lost someone this way. They do better work than we ever could." Malik looked back at the hospital, where the ICU lights still glowed cold through the windows. "I don't want to kill anyone," he said, "but I won't stop." Kessler raised her eyes. "I know. And I don't want you to kill anyone either. I need you smart. Don't give them a way to flip the story on you. Malik gave a slight nod, the kind of confirmation only two people would understand. He said, "If R7 is real, I'll trace it to the root." Kessler shut the trunk, eyeing him like she was measuring his resolve. "You've already started. From the second you saw your wife unconscious in that bed, you were in." Malik stood still for a moment, his hand resting on the document bag. The look in his eyes was no longer pain. It had shifted into something farther, colder. He looked at Kessler. "How will you contact me?" Kessler replied, "Anonymous message. You'll know it's me. R." She stepped back and got into the car. Just before closing the door, she said one last thing. "I hope you understand what you're walking into." Malik met her eyes. "I understand perfectly." As the sound of Kessler's engine faded into the distance, Malik remained in the middle of the empty lot. He opened the document bag once more, his eyes landing on the words R7. The hum of the emergency ward's air conditioning carried across the night, mixing with Nyla's voice still echoing in his head, the last thing she said before blacking out, and it made him clench his fist. In the darkness of the hospital parking lot, Malik understood that everything he had ever learned, lived through, and endured had come back to lead him to a path he could not walk away from. And he didn't want to walk away. He would go to the end of R7. Malik sat in his car for a long time after Kessler left the lot, the folder on the passenger seat radiating a strange heat that seemed to warm the air around it. He opened it again not to read, but to examine every page closely, every line, every hurried note. Everything pointed in the same direction. Ramsey and Morell were not acting alone. They followed a repeated pattern, and that pattern could be traced. He pulled out the small notebook he always kept in the car, flipping to the first blank page. It was the kind he used during reconnaissance tight handwriting, private symbols, unreadable to anyone but him. Malik started jotting down the timestamps of the stops those two had made over the last 3 months. He cross-referenced the list from the security guard with the entries in Kessler's documents. Then, he began connecting the dots, times, locations like reconstructing a target's route in a real mission. A shape began to emerge. It wasn't a normal patrol path. It was a suspiciously tight loop. They avoided routes with working cameras. They preferred dark turns, intersections with little traffic. Malik drew an arrow tracing the path from the nursing wing to Garage B, then looping northbound to the upper exit. That was the exact area where cameras often skipped frames late at night. In the margin he wrote, "Route shifts when body cam fails." He leaned back in his seat, staring up at the roof of the car, as if replaying Jared's words in his mind. 7 cases, same pattern, same excuse, same 2 names. It couldn't be coincidence. He opened his laptop and loaded the gate footage the security guard had shown him. Using the blurry frames, he compared the angles of nearby cameras. Every time a body cam malfunctioned, Ramsey and Morell's patrol route shifted into unsupervised zones, shifted like a habit practiced over months. Malik zoomed into the map, marking every broken camera and blind spot. A jagged red line cut through 3 exact locations, also flagged in vehicle seizure reports. The longer he stared at that path, the clearer it became. These weren't random victims. They were chosen based on locations that could erase all traces. He opened the folder again and found the page with images of the confiscated vehicles. The VIN numbers in 3 cases had been scrubbed using the same method. The grind marks near the edge were so consistent it had to be the same tool set. He wrote in the notebook, "Same garage, same process." Then he flipped to the financial records, noting odd late-night transactions into an unregistered account. The amounts weren't large, but they were regular like commission payouts to a middleman. Malik remembered Kessler's words. They resell the seized cars. He turned to the transaction logs. There it was a string of consistent deposits at 3 in the morning, over 4 consecutive days. All from an account linked to a garage just a few blocks from the hospital. He marked the garage's address, closed the laptop, and sat still for a moment. But what truly chilled him was what he found when checking the ATM camera near the parking lot. That system wasn't under hospital control. No one in the basement could tamper with it. Downloading the footage from 2 weeks ago, Malik paused at the 7th frame. Ramsey, out of uniform, in light rain. A young black man stood at the ATM, bending down to pick up his card. Ramsey approached without a word, shoved the man hard enough to send him sideways. The next frame showed Ramsey grabbing the young man by the shirt and slamming him into the wall. His mouth was open, clearly yelling, but the ATM mic didn't catch the audio. Malik adjusted the brightness, watched again and again. The young man didn't fight back. He just raised his hands, his mouth forming what looked like, "I didn't do anything." But Ramsey didn't stop. He punched the man in the chest, a blow like he was testing for a reaction. The camera clearly captured the sheer panic in the man's eyes as he was pinned between the wall and Ramsey's body. Malik paused on the frame of the man clutching his chest. He stared so long the laptop screen went dark. He turned it back on, played it in slow motion. Ramsey's face lit by the yellow ATM light. No anger, no stress, just the cold expression of someone who had done this too many times to feel anything anymore. At the end of the clip, Ramsey turned and walked away. The young man rolled to one side, clutching his stomach, trying to stand. There was no report of the incident, no record, no paperwork, nothing in the hospital system, as if it had never happened. Malik closed his eyes for a moment. His head filled with the echo of things Ramsey had said to Nyla, to Jared. The fragments he had gathered in just a few hours began to lock into place. A full picture. Vehicle seizures, suspicious patrol patterns, cameras disabled on purpose, garages scrubbing VINs, steady nighttime money transfers, and this ATM footage. He opened his notebook and wrote the final line of that night. He's done this before. This is a pattern, not a mistake. As he closed the notebook, Malik knew one thing for certain. This was no longer an investigation into what happened to Nyla. This was a hunt. And the first person he was going after wasn't Morell. It was Ramsey, the one leaving more evidence behind than he realized. Morell finished his shift later than usual, stuck writing a report for a traffic stop he could barely remember. His mind was still fogged with the unease from the night before, the feeling that someone had been staring into the back of his neck, even though no one else had been in the parking lot. He started the patrol car, the engine roaring in the quiet night. On the radio, dispatch reported everything as calm. He pressed the gas and headed across the bridge that led out to the main road, where the streetlights stood in a row, casting steady yellow light on the pavement. Halfway across the bridge, all the lights went out at once, like someone had cut power to the entire line. No warning, no flicker, just sudden blackness. He slammed the brakes, barely able to see the faint lane markings beneath the tires. Morell cursed under his breath, gripping the steering wheel tighter. What the hell? This wasn't his first night patrol, but the way the lights died reminded him of those ambush training films, and the thing that rattled him most was the feeling that someone else was controlling the scene, not him. He turned on the high beams, sweeping light across the road ahead. But just as the front of the car lit up, a small red dot appeared on his neck. Morell froze, heart pounding like it was trying to break through his chest. He knew exactly what that red meant too well. A chill ran down his spine like a metal blade. He glanced in the rearview mirror. Nothing but black. He tilted his head slightly left. The red dot moved with him, tracking his breath. He whispered, "Not real. Not real." But his throat was so dry the words sounded like air. He tried to steady his hands, scanning both sides of the bridge. No cars, no people. But someone had a scope trained on the artery in his neck. Morell lunged for the radio, trying to call in. Dispatch situation. But the voice that came through wasn't dispatch. A familiar voice cut into the frequency. That sickly, mocking tone that made his stomach turn. It was Ramsey's voice. Not Ramsey in the moment, but a recording something he'd heard Ramsey say to a black man they had once stopped. That sentence now played back, low enough to know it was deliberate, clear enough to hear every word. Black folks should know when to stay quiet. Morrell went rigid in his seat. Memories crashed over him, nights standing next to Ramsey, watching him shove people to the ground, bark at innocents, slap a woman who hadn't fought back. All of it returned at once. Ramsey's voice repeated over the radio, slower now, colder, dragging across his ears. No. When. To. Stay. Quiet. Morrell screamed, "Cut this crap!" and slammed the radio with the back of his hand, trying to silence it. But it didn't turn off, just crackled and played the sentence again. The red dot stayed on his neck. He kicked the door open and bolted out, slipping half a step from the darkness. The car's headlights behind him cast his shadow long across the road. He reached up to his neck, trying to shield the dot, crouched low looking for cover. There was nothing, just the guardrail and a long drop beneath the bridge. His hands shook too much to steady himself. Then he heard a faint sound, not louder than the wind, but enough to tell him someone was moving above. Morrell looked up toward the bridge's support structure, but saw nothing, just black shapes. He backed up, spine hitting the patrol car, sweat pouring down his neck even in the cold night. Just as he tried to figure out where to run, the lights at the start of the bridge snapped back on, flooding the road and blinding him for a beat. He squinted, stepping back. From the bridge's entrance, two black SUVs sped toward him and screeched to a stop just meters away. The doors flung open. Flashlights hit his face, and sharp voices rang out. "Morrell, on your knees, hands behind your head." The DOJ came in with the speed of a rapid response unit. They surrounded him with the precision of people who had been watching from a distance for hours. An agent pinned him down and snapped on the cuffs. Morrell tried to speak. "Someone's aiming at me. There's a sniper on the bridge. Someone's got a gun on me." But his voice trailed off, his mind spinning. One of the agents looked him straight in the eye. "No one's shooting at you." Morrell looked around, desperate for proof of the red dot anything. But there was nothing. No glint of glass, no reflection, no shape on the bridge's frame. The agent tilted his head, his voice quiet, confirming the one thing Morrell feared most. Someone just had to make you scared. "And you scare easy." They hauled Morrell to his feet. His hands shook so badly the cuffs clinked together. The DOJ searched his patrol car, seized the radio, and the onboard computer. One agent opened the SUV's back door and shoved him in. Just before the door slammed shut, Morrell looked outside one last time. In the distance, on top of an unfinished building, a figure stood pressed against the steel frame, face obscured. Just enough for Morrell to know he'd been watched from the moment he left the hospital lot. He tried to shout, to call out, but the door slammed shut, the lock clicked, and any chance to speak was gone. The DOJ vehicle pulled off the bridge. No one told him that the person who set this all in motion didn't have to touch him, didn't have to make a direct threat, and still broke him completely. Malik, just like Kessler said, didn't have to fire a shot. He only had to let Morrell feel exactly what he had made others feel. And this was only the first target. Malik arrived at the garage past midnight, headlights off, silent. This was the address pointed to by both Kessler's documents and the hidden transaction records. An old garage tucked behind an abandoned warehouse, its rolling door pulled halfway down like whoever was inside wasn't too worried about getting caught. Malik stepped out of the car, hearing the steady clang of metal from inside, like someone grinding something down. He paused for a second to locate the sound, then walked straight to the narrow opening in the door. He didn't knock. He pushed. The door banged open, and the metal slam echoed, making the man inside jolt like he'd been shocked. He looked up, caught in the harsh light of a single hanging bulb. He was in his 40s, grease-streaked work shirt, still holding the tool he was using to grind the VIN number off a black sedan. The air was thick with chemical fumes. He looked at Malik for barely a second, then dropped the tool and ran toward the back exit. Malik took 3 long strides, grabbed him by the collar, yanked him back, and slammed him onto the concrete. The man hit the floor so hard it knocked the breath out of him with a sickening gasp. He rolled over, shielding his face like a child bracing for more. "Don't kill me!" he cried, his voice pitched high, legs curling up beneath him. Malik said nothing. He dropped to one knee, pressing his hand to the man's shoulder. Staring long enough for him to understand there was no option here but the truth. The man panted, blinking fast, then blurted out his first line. "I don't know anything." Malik's stare made him change course immediately. "I just scrubbed the numbers. I don't know what happens outside." Malik tilted his head. "You know who brings the cars?" The man nodded instantly, like a machine. "There's a list. Everything's recorded. I keep it in the cabinet triple locked. I'll get it, I swear." Malik loosened his grip just enough for him to stand, but not flee. The man scrambled to a steel cabinet, his hands shaking so badly he had to try the key 3 times before it slid in. He opened the cabinet and pulled out a thick ledger, not even trying to hide it. Malik took it, flipping through a few pages. Each entry listed a seized vehicle owner, VINs already scrubbed, dates delivered, and amounts paid. Every line was an illegal deal, written like a family's expense log. The man looked at Malik, voice cracking. "I even wrote down who dropped the cars off," Malik asked. "Who?" he replied quickly. "Ramsey or Morell. They bring in the most." Malik flipped to the last page, finding scribbled notes. "Night of the 17th, extra $2,000. That guy's car, rush job." He pressed the ledger into the man's chest. "Who gets the money?" The man breathed fast. "I keep a small cut. The rest goes up to the guy protecting us." Malik asked. "Who?" The man hesitated, like even saying it out loud might get him killed, then whispered, barely audible. Malik stood still for a few seconds. He'd seen that name in the R7 file. This man had just confirmed everything Malik had suspected. He stepped forward, and the man backed into the cabinet, hands raised out of instinct. "I told you everything," he pleaded. "I don't know what happened to your wife. I just work on the cars." Malik looked around the garage. On the workbench, metal shavings from VIN plates nearly scrubbed clean. On the floor, buckets of chemical solvents. In the corner, a camera. Wires snipped. Everything in the space was evidence of the system Ramsey and Morell had run for months. But Malik knew there was still more the man hadn't said. "What was the last thing?" Malik asked, voice low but sharp enough to cut through lies. The man swallowed hard, stepping back, though there was nowhere left to go. "Just another car delivery." Malik stared straight into him. "What else?" The man hesitated. His breath got shallow. Then he dropped it all in one breath, like a stone falling from his chest. "I heard Ramsey brag. Said he just took care of someone." Malik didn't blink. The man glanced down, then up again. "I don't know the name. He said that guy talked too much, so he handled it quick. Out on the street, no trace." Malik straightened. The air in the garage turned cold. The man kept talking, voice shaking like a snapped wire. "Ramsey said it was easy, like taking out the trash. He said no one would ever find out. He laughed when he said it." Silence settled thick. Malik gripped the ledger, the weight of it like iron. He looked down at the man still curled on the floor. "You got anything else?" The man shook his head rapidly. "That's everything. Please don't kill me. I didn't touch your wife. I don't know what happened to her." Malik crouched slightly. His voice came out low. "I'm not gonna kill you." The man's eyes opened, unsure if he'd heard right. Malik continued, "But you're going to take me to the last place Ramsey dropped a car." The man nodded, terror written all over his face. "Okay, I'll take you." Malik stood, scanning the garage one last time. The tools, the ledgers, the chemical stains, every piece was a link in the chain. But the most important piece had just come out of this man's mouth. Ramsey had cleaned up someone recently, which meant he was now erasing witnesses, erasing anyone who could speak the truth. Malik opened the garage door. Cold night air rushed in, making everything sharper. He told the man, "Go first." "It's Said." The man walked ahead, legs shaking but moving, because behind him was a man who had nearly lost his wife before his eyes, and who was now starting to tear apart every link in a carefully constructed chain of crimes. This was the sharpest turning point yet. From this moment on, Malik was no longer searching. He was dismantling. Ramsey arrived at the container yard just before dawn, the sky still dark, but carrying the weight of a long night about to end. He killed the headlights from a distance, steering into the hidden corner behind a row of steel crates, his usual spot for stashing cash skimmed off impounded vehicles. He was used to coming here while the city slept. No one questioned why a patrol officer would show up at an old freight lot at this hour. He stepped out of the car, shoulders tense, still bitter about Morell being taken in the night before. In Ramsey's mind, Morell got caught because he was stupid, not because anyone had been watching them. Ramsey still believed he was untouchable. Years spent living in the cracks of the system had convinced him of that. He approached the container and slipped the key into the lock like always. But before he could even turn it fully, a sharp crack rang out. The padlock shattered and burst into metal fragments, clattering to the ground as if someone had fired on it from a distance. Ramsey flinched backward, stumbling 2 steps. His heart slammed against his ribs. He scanned the shadows, but saw only the still hulks of metal boxes under pale yellow lights. He muttered, "What the hell? Who the—" Before the sentence finished, another shot cracked out. This time, the camera mounted on top of the container exploded. Shards of glass rained onto his shoulders. Ramsey could not stay still now. He ducked, pulling his gun with trembling hands, not knowing what he was up against. He spun in place, gun sweeping the dark gaps between containers, his voice hoarse. "Come out, coward!" A third shot rang out, this one so close it whistled past his ear and punched into the steel wall inches from his head. Ramsey stumbled backward, knees buckling. His ears rang, his breath came in bursts. For the first time in his life, he knew exactly what it felt like to be the hunted, not by civilians, but by someone trained. Someone who could kill clean and never be seen. He gritted his teeth and slammed the radio on. "Dispatch, I'm under fire." The radio hissed, then cut to a voice. A man's voice, low, calm, every word clear. It was Ramsey's own frequency, but the voice wasn't his. It was Malik. "Ramsey," the voice said, slow, steady, like he was sitting right there in the car. "If I wanted you dead, I would have done it with the first shot." Ramsey froze. His eyes darted like a wounded animal, searching for a way out that wasn't there. "Who the hell are you?" he barked, voice shaking beneath a flimsy layer of defiance. Malik answered, "The man whose wife you nearly beat to death. She's in the ICU." Ramsey swallowed hard, legs giving a little. I don't know what you're talking about." Malik cut him off. "Don't lie. I'm less than 100 meters from you. I can see the color drain from your face." Ramsey had to grip the edge of the container to keep standing. Sweat drenched his back despite the cold air. "What? What do you want?" Malik's voice didn't shift. "I want to know who gave the order to hurt my wife." Ramsey went silent. He knew there was no way out of this part. No one knew he was here this early. No one was close enough to listen. And whoever was speaking to him wasn't bluffing. He tried to keep his voice steady, to sound like he still had control. She resisted arrest. Another shot rang out. This one hit the ground right next to his foot. Dirt sprayed up, spattering his pant leg. Ramsey yelled, "Stop," Malik said through the radio. "I told you don't lie." A long pause followed. Ramsey gasped for breath. Eyes searching the tops of the containers, looking for any sign of someone he could reason with. But the yard was silent, empty, cleared like a stage. Just him, and the voice that clung to every breath he took. He drew in a long breath and broke. "It wasn't me," Ramsey said quickly. The order came from Captain Cray. Malik didn't answer at first. The silence stretched so long, Ramsey thought the radio had gone dead. Then Malik spoke. "What was Cray's part in it?" "Edo," Ramsey stammered, his voice cracking. "He took the money. Told us to target high-end cars. Said black folks driving expensive cars can't prove anything. He told us to hit hard if anyone resisted." He swallowed hard. He said, "She had to be silenced. If not," Malik pressed. "If not what?" Ramsey's grip on the gun turned his knuckles white. He said, "Remove her." The words froze the air. Ramsey slumped against the container wall, legs folding. He buried his face in his hands, his voice shaking. "I didn't want to go that far. Morell took it too far. I didn't think it would get that bad," Malik said. "What you thought doesn't matter. You stood there," Ramsey shouted. "I didn't hit her like he did. I was just following orders." Malik's final words were soft, sharp as a blade sliding between boards. "Good. Then you'll say that again in court." The radio went silent, leaving Ramsey collapsed beside the container, drained. 1 minute later, headlights flared at the far end of the yard. A DOJ vehicle lit up Ramsey's pale face. He raised both hands without thinking, finally understanding there was nowhere left to run. Malik never laid a hand on him. He didn't need to. Ramsey gave up everything on his own. And from that moment on, the biggest link in the R7 chain was broken. Malik arrived at the illegal garage in the early morning, when the entire neighborhood was still and silent like the surface of a pond. This was the place the number scrubber had once mentioned, where Ramsey and Morell brought cars after stopping people without cause. Malik didn't need to figure out how to open the door. The lock was worn down, and the metal door popped open with a firm pull. He stepped inside and closed it behind him, the clank of metal echoing like a marker signaling the next phase of the hunt. The space inside was a mess. Oil stains smeared the floor, and tools were scattered, as if the user knew them too well to bother cleaning up. Malik moved slowly, eyes scanning each corner like he was reading the scene through the lens of his battlefield memory. He looked toward a row of metal cabinets along the wall, where several locks had been replaced haphazardly. One of them looked newer, the paint still fresh. Malik approached and used the tip of a screwdriver to pry at the corner. The lock popped open, like the person who closed it never expected anyone to check. Inside was an old computer, its hard drive removed, and a stack of handwritten notebooks. Malik flipped through the pages, but what made him stop were the notes unrelated to VIN tampering. One page read, "Shift watch, 7 p.m., 11 p.m. Another marked an arrow pointing from the recovery wing down to the garage. Among them was one marked with red. She went alone. No one followed. Malik read those 3 words, over and over. They weren't technical notes. They were confirmation that Nyla had been watched long before she stepped into the garage. His chest burned like fire. Not from anger, but from the sharp moment when a truth fell perfectly into place. What happened to Nyla wasn't random. It wasn't bad luck. It was target selection, timing, choosing someone easy to attack because they thought no one would protect her. Malik kept turning pages. Another entry read, Vehicle processing, 12 a.m., 3 a.m., next to a small diagram showing camera positions at the hospital cameras that had been disabled the night Nyla was assaulted. The scrawled line, Memory cards taken, made him stop. He looked around, searching for those cards. On the workbench was an old black plastic box, oil on the corners, the lid barely closed. Malik opened it. Inside were 3 small memory cards and an old USB stick. He put each into his coat pocket, fully aware that if even one of these files survived, every effort Ramsey and Cray made to cover things up would collapse. On the shelf to the right was a delivery log, a more detailed list than the one the number scrubber had handed over. It included drop-off times, names of the drivers, even timestamps matching Ramsey and Morell's shifts. Malik spotted the familiar line, Vehicle, Midnight Shift, which matched the night Nyla was attacked. He flipped to the last page. The final entry read, Prepare to destroy bloodied items. No detail, just that short line. Malik turned toward the water tank in the corner of the room, where a trash bag sat untied. He walked over and pulled it open, finding only rags soaked in chemicals and a few torn pieces of used gloves. He was about to close it when he noticed a smaller bag pushed down at the bottom, its opening partly exposed, showing a scrap of light gray cloth. Malik picked it up and unfolded it. His gaze froze. The cloth had a deep, dried red stain. That red wasn't chemical. It didn't smear like oil. It was blood. And on the edge of the fabric was a short black hair tangled in the threads, just like Nyla's hair after a long shift. Malik clenched the cloth, his hand tightening until the creases pressed into his palm. In that moment, the room seemed to lose all its air. He remembered the image of Nyla in the ICU, white bandages wrapped around her head, a faint line of blood at her hairline. The doctor said she had taken a blow to a hard surface. The cloth in Malik's hand was either that surface or was used to wipe her blood after the hit. It hadn't been left there by mistake. It was still here, because someone hadn't had time to destroy it. Malik took a deep breath, but it felt like he was dragging the whole room down with him. His eyes were no longer just filled with pain, they had become something deeper, quieter. He slipped the cloth into his coat pocket, then stood and looked around the garage again. The notebooks, the memory cards, the delivery log, the lockers, everything was falling into place to become solid evidence exposing the R7 network. He turned off the lights and left the garage. The metal door closed behind him with a long echo. The people who worked in the shadows thought they knew how to stay hidden, but they forgot one thing. Some men had spent their lives on battlefields, and there's nothing they can hide from someone like Malik. He stepped into the night, his hand brushing the pocket where the blood-stained cloth lay. It was no longer just evidence, it was a reminder that from now on, there was no going back. He had touched the root of the rot, and Malik wasn't the kind of man to let go once he'd seen the root. Kessler received the document bag from Malik right in the old hospital parking lot, where the yellow light spilled onto the damp pavement like it was trying to keep everything quiet. She opened the bag and checked each item one by one. A memory card removed from the hospital's camera, a car logbook from the illegal garage, a list of VIN tampering, timestamps for pickups and drop-offs, and finally, a blood-stained cloth carefully wrapped. Kessler's eyes changed as she stared at the dried red smear. She folded the bag, zipped it up, and said in a restrained voice, "That's enough for me to begin." Whoa. She didn't report back to headquarters. No one in the DOJ knew about this meeting except her. Kessler turned away, walked quickly to her car, and called 3 people from her covert investigation unit. None of them appeared on the official personnel chart, but they had worked on undercover cases the DOJ didn't want made public. When they arrived, Kessler handed over the document bag and said curtly, "Top priority. No waiting for orders." They nodded, opened the files right there in the car, their eyes scanning every word with the alert focus of people used to following dirty trails. Kessler told them to reopen all internal documents from the police department records previously sealed under investigation, but in reality, locked away so no one could ever look at them again. When the seals were broken, the papers felt cold, like something left too long in the dark. Inside were patrol reports from Ramsey and Morrell, half-cut transcripts, a few pages signed by Captain Cray, most of them with a showy, overconfident signature of someone who believed they were above the law. One agent called Kessler over. "You need to see this." On the patrol schedule, 12 yellow boxes were marked. All of them matched exactly with suspicious locations Malik had already identified. Not one, not 3, but 12 incidents rerouted through blind camera spots. Every single one listed the same reasons: body cam malfunction, camera zone down, technical issue. Kessler drew a red line through each box. They've been doing this for a whole quarter. Another agent checked the GPS from Morrell's patrol car the night before. The data clearly showed every stop, every minute off course. When matched against internal records, everything lined up to the centimeter. The blind spots, broken cameras, night patrols of Ramsey and Morrell, the car drop-off points for the garage, every link in the chain locked into place. Kessler circled the money handoff spot from the night Ramsey went to the container. This is where he stashed the cut. She looked over the full map spread across the hood of the car, like someone standing at the eye of a storm where every direction led back to the police station. They're not acting on impulse. They're working under orders. As 1940. One agent opened another file no one had dared touch for a long time. Inside were disciplinary reports of officers who had complained about Cray. Some were reassigned. Some were forced to resign. None were ever heard from again. All of it scrubbed clean, like they never existed. Kessler straightened. "Now I need one thing." She ordered a quiet summons of all mid-ranking officers involved in the night shifts, not an official summons. These were private calls, set to meet in the DOJ's old archive room in the basement. A room with no cameras, no audio recording, just one wooden table and 2 worn-out chairs. The first person Kessler called in was a lieutenant named Hodge. He was around 40, with the gray face of someone who hadn't slept in many nights. When he stepped inside, Hodge stood stiff, like someone unsure if he was a witness or a suspect. Kessler motioned for him to sit. "You have 2 choices," Kessler said. "You tell the truth right now, or the DOJ treats you as an accomplice." Hodge swallowed hard. I don't know much." Kessler leaned on the table, her eyes locked on him. "I have Morrell's GPS, showing 12 route deviations. I have the garage logs. I have Cray's signed night patrol orders every time a camera went down. Now tell me what you know." Hodge clenched his hands on his knees, eyes on the floor. After a moment, he said softly, "Cray allowed body cams to be turned off. It doesn't it as his'n a never." Kessler held her breath for a second. "Are you sure?" Hodge nodded, his voice shaking but clear. "He said to turn them off when needed. Not to record things that shouldn't go into the system. I heard him say it directly to Ramsey and Morrell. I was standing in the hallway." Kessler breathed slowly. "What were his exact words?" Hodge replied. "He said, 'You turn the cameras off when cleaning things up. Don't let the footage mess things up.'" He bit his lip. "He also said black women tend to be loud, so if needed, give them a harder warning." The sentence hit the room like a rock dropped into water. No one moved. Only the quiet hum of the air conditioner ran above them. Kessler stood up, turned away for a few seconds to keep her composure. She'd worked on hundreds of dirty internal cases, but what Hodge just said had a different chill. It wasn't a personal failure. It was a hidden policy. An unspoken directive. A green light for violence. What else? Kessler asked, her voice low and tight. Hodge shook his head. That's all. I don't want any part of this. I asked to switch shifts several times, and no one approved it. Kessler returned to the table, gathered the files, and said the one thing that made Hodge visibly shake. You just saved yourself. The lieutenant bowed his head, exhaling like he'd just laid down a heavy weight. When Hodge left the room, Kessler closed the door and rested her hand on the stack of files Malik had given her. She knew it was time to open up the whole corruption ring. No more reason to hold back. Cray had authorized the disabling of body cams, which made him the central link, and once the center was exposed, the whole operation would collapse faster than anyone thought. Kessler looked at the file one more time, then said softly, just loud enough for herself to hear, Malik, you cracked the first door. I'll open the rest. Cray chose the abandoned parking lot on the edge of the city, thinking no one ever came near it anymore. Whenever there was something to clean up, he always picked places where he believed only the wind and trash could hear. The two lieutenants flanking him stood apart, trying not to look nervous. Cray was the opposite. He walked boldly to the center of the lot, took off his leather gloves, and tossed them onto the hood of an old car like it was his office. The thing with Morell getting arrested? Cray said, his tone as casual as if talking about the weather. Not our fault. That guy's just stupid, that's all. One of the lieutenants spoke up. Heard someone jammed the radio signal. Cray scoffed, amused. Radio interference? Big deal. What matters is no one traced it back to us. He paced a few steps around the car, hand on his hip, head tilted slightly toward his subordinates. You two keep worrying about small stuff. The real problem is Ramsey. If he opens his mouth. He didn't finish the sentence, but both lieutenants understood. One of them swallowed hard. You think he'll talk? Cray waved it off. No way. Ramsey owes me. I've covered for him more times than I can count. The air in the lot was thin in that way that makes your skin crawl. Cray's confidence wasn't the kind that came from innocence. It was the kind that came from knowing the system had your back. He lit a cigarette, the flame of the lighter flickering for a second. That nurse situation, he muttered, bored. Should have gone smoother. Ramsey went too far, but whatever. She's with DOJ now. Let them deal with it. The two lieutenants glanced at each other. One asked quietly, So, what do we do now? Cray answered immediately. Wipe it clean. Anything connected to R7 has to go. The garage, the records, anyone who could talk gone. I have. He didn't know that every word he just said was being recorded, clearly and in full. The mic planted under the car, something Kessler had given Malik that night, had been live since the moment Cray showed up. A soft click had sounded as the device connected. Cray didn't hear it. The night wind swallowed the sound whole. But Malik did. The signal piped straight into the earpiece in his ear. He was positioned on the second floor of a half-finished building next door. Its steel beams exposed like ribs of a forgotten skeleton. Malik lay flat against the concrete, his rifle sight fixed ahead, barrel aimed directly at the lot. From up here, he could see all three men below. He could see Cray's cocky posture, like he was delivering a speech in a luxury boardroom instead of a garbage dump. Malik kept his breathing steady, hands firm on the weapon. He wasn't aiming for Cray's head. His sights were set on the metal plate over Cray's chest. Just a warning. Below, Cray kept talking. That number-scrubbing punk is probably hiding out now. If he opens his mouth, one lieutenant cut in. You think that guy can keep quiet? Cray smirked. Don't forget who signs his checks every month. At that moment, a small red dot appeared on Cray's chest, bright as an ember. It moved slowly across his shirt, from shoulder to heart. One lieutenant saw it first, face draining of color. Captain, There's something, but he didn't finish. The red dot had stopped, dead center. Cray looked down. The red light cast a faint glow under his chin. His face froze, mouth open, but no sound coming out. The two lieutenants backed away instinctively, still trying to figure out what was happening. The whole lot fell into a sealed silence. Then a voice came through one lieutenant's radio. It wasn't dispatch. It was Malik's. Low, slow, calm, like deep water. "Captain Cray," Malik said, "go on. Keep talking. About cleaning house." Cray spun around, looking for the source. "Who's there?" he barked. "Show yourself." Malik didn't answer right away. He watched from above, his rifle still trained on the warning mark. He didn't need to shoot. He just needed Cray to know someone was watching him, tracking him, listening to every word. Malik activated his mic. "I know everything. The garage, the money, the camera blackouts, the cleanup orders." Ramsey told it all. Cray sucked in a sharp breath, like trying to swallow the cold air. "No way," he said, voice cracking. "Ramsey wouldn't dare." Malik said. "He wouldn't." "But he did." Cray backed up against the car, heart pounding so loud one of the lieutenants could hear it. "Where is he? Where are you?" Cray shouted. Malik replied, "Close. Close enough to hear you talk about my wife." Cray's face went rigid. The two lieutenants now understood this wasn't a meeting anymore. It was a hunt. And the one watching from above wasn't an amateur. He was a soldier, trained to hit targets from distances most cops couldn't even spot. Malik lowered his voice, quiet as a blade slipping through stone. "I didn't come here to kill you. I just wanted you to know what it feels like to be hunted." The red dot slid gently to the left, then disappeared completely. Malik pulled back the rifle, stood up, and walked away from the ledge as the dark swallowed him. Cray collapsed. The second the laser vanished. The two lieutenants looked around in panic, unsure if the man above was gone or still watching. All three stood frozen for a moment, no one daring to move. Cray wiped the sweat from his face, tried to steady his breath, and motioned, "Inside. Meeting continues." Not out here. He didn't know if Malik had really left, or was still waiting for him to speak again. He didn't know the mic under the car was still recording every word. Cray thought he still had a chance to clean up everything, so he herded the lieutenants into the makeshift meeting room, the stupidest decision of the night. Cray shoved open the door to the makeshift meeting room inside the abandoned parking lot, herding the two lieutenants inside as if the earlier interruption had never happened. He believed the sniper was gone, believed the warning shot was just to scare him, and believed this rotting wooden room was still safe enough to continue business. Inside was nothing more than an old table, a few metal chairs with broken legs, and a torn curtain draped over the window. But to Cray, it was the perfect place to hide a crime. He stood in the center, planted both hands on the table, and took a long breath to regain his usual confidence. "We clean up the rest," he said, in the tone of someone convinced he controlled the whole game. "Ramsey, Morell get caught? Let them. But that girl has to die, so no one traces back to R7. The two lieutenants looked at each other like they'd just been punched. One cautiously spoke up. "Captain, she's still alive." Cray turned back, voice sharp. "Then make sure she doesn't stay alive. If she opens her eyes, the whole route goes down." The instant the word "down" left his mouth, a dry crack rang out by the window. A bullet sliced through the torn curtain and slammed deep into the tabletop, just inches from Cray's hands. Wood shards hit his neck, forcing him backward into the wall. The two lieutenants panicked, stepping back, muttering, "There's a sniper." Cray stared at the bullet, his face drained of color, breath spiraling out of control. If the shooter had meant to kill him, the shot would have gone through his forehead, not stopped at a warning. One lieutenant's radio suddenly clicked on. It wasn't the dispatcher. It wasn't a fellow officer. It was Malik. "Cray!" His voice rang out, steady and cold, freezing the whole room in place. "What was that you just said about my wife?" Cray snatched the radio, mouth trembling. Who's there? Show yourself!" Malik's tone didn't change. "You said she had to die to cover R7. I heard everything. Every word." The two lieutenants went stiff, realizing this meeting hadn't just been recorded. Someone was watching them. Somewhere close. Cray tried to shout to reclaim control. "I don't know who the hell you think you are." But Malik cut him off. "I'm standing close enough to see your face when you talked about my wife. Close enough for you to know you're not hidden anymore." No one in the room dared move. Then a red laser beam pierced in through the window again, sweeping slowly across the room, searching for a target. But it didn't land on Cray. It landed on Ramsey, the one the DOJ had just brought here to confront, still unaware what was going on. When the dot settled on his chest, Ramsey went pale, shaking his head like trying to erase a familiar memory. He whispered, "No, not me again." But the agent holding him said, "Stay still." Ramsey kept trembling. He knew exactly whose laser that was. The floodlights in the lot turned on. Two DOJ SUVs screeched in, doors flying open. Agents stormed the room like slicing through air. "Don't move, hands on your head." Cray was nearly ripped from the wall, both arms raised, stammering, "You don't have the authority to arrest me. I was following orders." Kessler walked in last, her stare colder than the night outside. "What orders?" she asked. "Turning off body cams, cleaning people up, choosing black victims, or covering R7? Cray stammered, "There's no proof." Kessler dropped a stack of files on the table right where the bullet was still lodged. 3 black servicemen listed as suicide. All 3 under your command. 1 filed a complaint. 2 other families filed as well. But the records vanished from the system on the exact nights you were on duty. Coincidence? Cray stood frozen. The 2 lieutenants nearly collapsed. Ramsey looked down at his chest, where the laser had just disappeared, as if part of his soul was still buried underground. Kessler stepped closer. "You think the DOJ doesn't know you allowed the body cams to be shut off? You think no one heard Lieutenant Hodge confess? Or you think no one dared talk about R7, the operation you ran from the center to take your cut?" Cray opened his mouth but couldn't form a single word. Everything he once used to protect himself, rank, power, shadows, vanished right in front of him. Agents cuffed Cray, reading him his rights. Ramsey was dragged out, still shaking from the laser. The 2 lieutenants stood silent like statues. No one saw Malik. No one heard his footsteps. But they all knew he was out there somewhere, watching, as each one of them paid their price. Cray looked down at the bullet lodged in the table, then up into the dark where Malik once had his scope. For the first time in years, he truly understood how it felt to be the one cornered, and he knew. The dirty network he built had been exposed, starting with the one sentence he thought no one would ever hear. The DOJ got to work right after Cray was arrested. No waiting for trial, no waiting for the press, no waiting for the system to collect itself. Kessler assembled a team specialized in scene reconstruction, bringing cameras, models, and 2 trained actors who regularly reenacted violent scenarios in internal investigations. They chose the old basement garage of St. Alder Hospital, the very place where Nyla had been cornered by Ramsey and Morell. It wasn't for filming, it was to recreate every movement, every word, every step, matching Nyla's statement with GPS data. A female actor wore a nurse's uniform identical to Nyla's and stood in the exact corner where Nyla had been forced. One male actor played Morell, the other took on Ramsey. The investigation team marked positions down to the shoe prints, the angle of the scraped wall, the spot where Nyla's phone had fallen and shattered. Kessler stood on the sidelines, arms crossed, face cold like someone too familiar with the brutal way truth comes out. When the moral actor pinned the actress to the floor, a verification officer immediately compared the position to photos of Nyla's injuries. "Same spot," he said softly. When the Ramsey actor snatched the hospital ID from her hand, another agent cross-referenced the GPS timeline of the patrol car in that area. Perfect match. When they reenacted the strike that knocked Nyla unconscious, Kessler closed her eyes for 1 second, but opened them again just as quickly. To stay objective, an agent called out, "Impact. Point on the head lines up with the hematoma behind the victim's skull." Each movement was repeated 3 times, and all 3 times, every detail matched Nyla's account with such precision that there was no doubt left. A young agent looked at the results sheet and let out a breath. "There's nothing more we need." She didn't miss a single detail. Kessler gave a small nod, a quiet confirmation that her instincts had been right from the beginning. This wasn't 2 officers losing control. This was a coordinated act planned, arranged so that not a second of it appeared on camera. As the reconstruction ended, an agent rushed over to hand Kessler a small hard drive. "Footage from the store across from the hospital is fully downloaded," he said. Kessler took it, plugged it into a mobile monitor. The image flickered into view, a camera angle from the convenience store facing the hospital garage entrance. The timestamp showed 40 minutes before Nyla ended her shift. In the frame, a man approached the garage. The light hit his face at an angle. No mistaking it. It was Cray. Kessler zoomed in. Cray stood at the stairwell, looking down into the garage. He wasn't holding a radio. He wasn't on patrol. There was no reason for him to be there at that hour. She called the agent, assigned to verify digital data. He claimed in his report that he was in a meeting on the hospital's west side at that time. The agent opened the file, and his access card confirms West Wing location. Kessler said, "Check the timestamps." The agent ran the comparison, but his face froze after just a few seconds. The access card time was altered. The log doesn't match the video. The system shows him swiping in at another building at the exact moment he's seen here. The group fell silent for a moment. Kessler immediately understood what that meant. To edit the access card timestamp, someone had tampered with the internal control system of the entire police department. Not a team leader, not a patrol officer, someone at the system level. Someone with direct access to the data. An agent let out a sharp breath. That means someone in the tech office is protecting him. Eden Industup, whoever it is, edited the log to hide the fact that he was at the garage. Another added. Which means R7 doesn't stop at Cray. Someone higher is pulling strings. Kessler looked at the hard drive for a few seconds, her gaze darkening like someone who'd just seen the shadow of a larger animal in the forest. Cray was there before the attack. That means he was checking the scene, making sure everything was ready. An agent asked, "What do we do now?" Kessler answered, "We go up. Someone higher is clearing the path for him, and they think we won't catch the altered timestamp." She looked around at the team. "We have the video as our baseline. We have the edited card data. We have a reenactment that matches Nyla's statement exactly." Then she said the line that made the entire team straighten up. "Next, we open the entire police department's security system and drag the one in the shadows into the light. It's 787 CW. Kessler closed the laptop and turned to walk away, but stopped at the door and looked back at the reconstructed scene. She spoke very softly, but each word landed clearly. Nyla was right, every detail. Now it's our turn to tell the rest. Malik stood in the hallway, not part of the scene but watching it all from a distance. When he heard that Cray had been present before the attack, his hands clenched until his knuckles turned white. The wall of silence the system had built around the name R7 had started to crack, And from the moment the access card's timestamp was proven fake, Malik knew this was no longer an investigation. This was pulling down an entire layer of the system, and Cray was just the mask in front. The R7 file was delivered to federal court on a morning no one at the city police department expected. There was no press notice, no local officers present, no opportunity for anyone on the inside to tamper with the data any further. DOJ vehicles pulled up right at the front entrance, agents carrying boxes of evidence, camera memory cards, vehicle transfer logs, patrol schedules, hospital records, and a copy of Cray's interrogation transcript. On the second floor of the federal courthouse, Judge Briggs was already waiting. She was known as one of the most unpredictable and relentlessly tough judges in police misconduct cases. The hearing began without any formalities. Briggs simply looked down at the thick stack of documents, nearly the size of 2 fists, and said, "Bring in everyone who was affected." One by one, people entered the courtroom, each carrying a piece of a story they had kept to themselves for many months. An elderly black man had been pulled from his car on suspicion, though he was delivering medication for his wife. A young woman had her car seized in the middle of the night and never got it back. A brown-skinned college student had been shoved into a wall by Ramsey hard enough to bruise his shoulder. Even Jared Sloan was there, standing in the hallway for a long time before finally stepping inside. When the judge asked, each person took the stand and read their account in air thick as ash. Their voices didn't shout or accuse, but the truth in their words was strong enough to silence the room. While the testimony continued, Kessler signaled to a technical agent. The lights dimmed, and a projector screen lit up. A map appeared, marked with a dozen red points. Briggs raised an eyebrow. "What is this?" The agent answered, "A map of the full operations of the R7 network." The screen displayed the patrol routes of Ramsey and Morrell over 3 months' zigzagging paths, route changes that coincided with body cams being turned off, locations where cameras were broken, drop-off points to the illegal garage. All of it connected by a glowing yellow line, like a spiderweb wrapped around St. Alder Hospital and 3 surrounding black neighborhoods. As the full map appeared, Briggs leaned back in her chair, eyes cold as steel. "How many incidents are on this map?" The agent replied, 12. "But that's just the surface. Likely more." She gave a short nod. "Enter it into the record. The court will review it all." Ramsey sat in the defendant's row, head down, face pale as he watched each red dot appear on the screen. He knew exactly what each one meant. Each was a night when he and Morrell chose someone to push into the dark. Then came the hospital evidence. An agent presented the memory cards recovered from the illegal garage. On the screen, a grainy video appeared. The ramp leading to the hospital basement, shot from a street-facing camera. Cray's figure appeared on screen 40 minutes before Nyla ended her shift. He looked around, stood at the corner of the hallway, then stepped down into the blind spot where cameras could not see. The courtroom fell silent, like the air had been pulled out. Briggs tilted her head. "He said he was in a meeting on the West Wing at that time," the agent answered. "That was a false statement. His access card data was time-altered. We have the original log." Briggs tapped her pen on the bench. "Who can alter that log?" Kessler answered. "Someone with access to the system. Not a regular officer." The entire courtroom shifted. This was no longer about 2 dirty officers, no longer just an overreaching patrol team. This was a breach, right at the heart of the police department's security system. Briggs called for the next witness. "Bring the next person in." A young officer walked in, his uniform no longer as crisp as it was when he first joined the force. He sat in the witness chair, hands stacked to keep from shaking. Briggs asked, "Your name?" "Evan Price, ma'am." "Your unit?" "Department Security Tech." Briggs paused her pen. "All right, what do you know about this case?" Evan took a deep breath, then said a sentence loud enough for the entire room to hear. That night, Captain Cray ordered me to shut down the hospital cameras. No one moved. Ramsey's head snapped up. DOJ agents exchanged glances like they'd just heard the missing piece. Briggs continued, her voice low but firm. What exactly did he say? Evan answered. He called me in, handed me a sheet with the hospital route numbers, and said, "Tonight, don't let the cameras in Zone B send any data, for maintenance." I asked when to turn them back on. He said, "End of shift is fine. Just don't record anything during that time." Briggs stared long enough for Evan to lower his eyes. "You did it because you were pressured." Evan nodded. I was afraid of losing my job. I didn't know what he planned. I didn't think someone would end up nearly beaten to death." Kessler submitted a copy of an internal email Evan had sent 2 weeks before the Nyla incident. He had reported that Zone B's cameras were being shut off repeatedly during Ramsey's shifts. That email was never answered. Briggs studied the document, then said, "That means someone deliberately used technical staff to cover a window of time, which means R7 isn't just some low-level covert op, it reaches command level, too." As LOD recorded Evan's entire testimony, and his final words became the pivot of the trial. "If I don't speak today, I'll carry that guilt forever, because I know I was the one who shut off the cameras, and an innocent woman went down there alone." Ramsey bowed his head lower, as if trying to hide from the gaze of the entire room. Cray sat in the back, hands cuffed, his face pale as limestone. Briggs looked at him for a long time, then asked, "Do you have a response?" Cray opened his mouth, but no sound formed into speech. Everything was now out of his control. The entire R7 network laid bare in court, every link, every person, every log, every word. And now, someone from inside the system had stepped forward to tell the truth. This trial was no longer about one assault. It was the judgment of an entire power-abusing operation that had gone on for years. And with Evan's testimony, the final door had been blown wide open. Nyla entered the courtroom when the air was tight enough that even the rustle of papers on the clerk's desk sounded sharp. The doctor had allowed her to stand only for a short time, but no one in the room was prepared for the way she stepped onto the witness stand. No shaking, no avoiding the eyes of dozens of people. She stood straight, as if every bruise on her body had become part of the truth she was about to speak. Judge Briggs tilted her head. "Miss Jericho, you may begin whenever you're ready." Nyla drew a small breath and lifted her sleeve. Slowly, she revealed 2 dark purple scars running along her wrists, the marks left by cuffs that had tightened on her while she was unconscious in the hospital garage. The scars were fresh, deep in color, carved into her skin like a reminder of what she had endured. And the courtroom stopped breathing. A few people covered their mouths, some past victims bowed their heads, and on the defendant's side, Ramsey turned away, unable to look directly at the consequences of what he had done. Briggs tapped her pen on the bench, not to hurry her, but to focus the room. "What would you like to present?" Nyla looked straight ahead, her voice not loud but carrying every word. "I am not here to talk about how much I hurt. I did not survive to be pitied. I survived to force this system to wake up." A faint hiss came from a corner of the room, but died instantly as every gaze shifted toward Nyla. She continued, "They said I resisted an officer. They said I was stressed after my shift. They said I stepped into the wrong place at the wrong time. No, I was chosen. They watched me beforehand. They waited for me. And they believed no one would ever ask why." That's David Butler crossed sport a sea. Nyla recounted the night in the garage, with not a single detail added or removed, and without dramatizing a single emotion, as if reading from a military medical report. She said Ramsey approached first, not to check, but to force. She said Morel blocked her path as if she were a criminal. She described the slap that split her lip, then the sound of shoes, then metal hitting the floor when her phone was smashed. An older man in the gallery pressed a hand to his chest, holding down his anger. Nyla kept speaking evenly. I am a doctor. I had just saved a premature infant. I left my shift to call my husband about the adoption forms. And because I am a black woman standing in a dark garage, they thought they had the right to erase me from the story. Briggs listened without blinking. Miss Jericho, she asked, do you believe they wanted to kill you? Nyla answered instantly, I do. Because Morel did not stop, and because Ramsey smiled when I went unconscious. I heard them speaking right before I blacked out. Briggs recorded the statement. Repeat it for the record. Nyla nodded. Ramsey said, Down here, your skin color will not save you. The courtroom went silent, as if everyone's chest had been cinched tight. A DOJ agent clenched his jaw. Kessler stood in the back, watching Nyla with the eyes of someone who had fought her whole life while waiting for a moment like this. When Nyla paused to breathe, Briggs asked, Do you have anything else you want to tell the court? Nyla looked directly at the defendant's row, at Cray with his wrists shackled, and spoke each word clearly. I am not here to restore my dignity alone. I am here for the people stopped in the dark, the people pushed into dead zones because of their skin, the people who will never get to tell their stories. If I stay silent, I do not deserve them. Uncross. At that moment, a quiet sob broke from the left side of the room. A young policewoman in a blue uniform stood, her hand covering her mouth as tears streamed down her face. The courtroom turned toward her. Briggs asked, Officer, is there a problem? The officer shook her head, but the tears kept falling. Nyla looked at her, tilting her head slightly, as if recognizing something. Briggs signaled, If you need to step outside. But the officer shook her head again, harder this time, and spoke through a trembling voice. I was threatened by Cray. A sharp hiss rippled through the courtroom. Ramsey turned fully to look at her, as if he couldn't believe a fellow officer would dare say that in a federal trial. Cray's face turned an ashen gray, the collar of his shirt stretching with his quickened breath. Briggs signaled the bailiff to maintain order, then said, Step up to the stand. The young officer moved forward, her hands trembling, but her eyes steady on the judge. I don't know this victim. I've never met her. But, she swallowed hard, Cray once called me into the duty room, said I talked too much after I logged the wrong license plate into the system. He told me if I kept sticking my nose into the camera shutdown orders, I'd be reassigned to the most dangerous patrol zone. Briggs leaned back in her chair, glanced at Cray's file, then turned to the two DOJ agents. Enter her testimony into the record. As soon as the officer finished, she broke into heavier sobs, no longer able to hold it in. An agent offered her tissues, but she shook her head, as if those tears weren't from fear but release. Nyla looked at her, her expression softening for the first and only time that day. Briggs turned back to the R7 file. It appears, Mr. Cray didn't just threaten the victim. He threatened his own staff. One agent nodded. Your Honor, we have two other reports stating that Cray routinely pressured younger staff to alter logs or ignore violations. Briggs continued writing into the record, her tone heavy, like every word was a nail hammered into the coffin of Cray's career. Nyla stood there, leaning on no one, refusing to step back. And the courtroom watched her, as if seeing someone reclaim space that R7 had long used to keep everyone small. Briggs closed the testimony with a simple sentence. Thank you, Miss Jericho. The court recognizes your full statement. Nyla gave a brief nod, then stepped back toward the gallery, hands clasped, but her steps were steady. And in that moment, everyone in the room understood. It wasn't the DOJ or the R7 map that shifted this case. It was the woman standing there, with 2 dark scars on her arms and a voice strong enough to rip through years of silence. The sentencing took place in the afternoon, as the soft light of the fading day streamed through the tall windows of the federal courthouse, casting a dim hue over the gallery seats, as if preparing the room for what was about to happen. No one spoke. 40, 20, 100, 200, 40, 100. No one flipped a page. No one dared look at the defendant's bench for too long. Ramsey, Morell, and Cray sat in the front row, cold cuffs on their wrists, their eyes no longer anchored to anything. Ramsey looked visibly thinner, his hair dry, lips pale, as if his entire body had been hollowed out, now that he no longer wore the armor of authority. Morell stared at the floor, shoulders drawn in like he feared being touched. Cray kept his head up, but his eyes had shattered. He could no longer hide that he knew what was coming. Judge Briggs entered and placed a thick file down on the bench with a weight like stone. She looked at the 3 men in front of her for a breathless few seconds. After reviewing all evidence, victim testimony, GPS data, surveillance footage, the results of the scene reconstruction, and confessions from internal staff, Briggs said, each word precise, "This court issues its ruling." The entire room turned its eyes toward her. Briggs looked first to Ramsey. "Officer Clay Ramsey, the court finds you guilty of premeditated assault, abuse of authority, conspiracy in the R7 operation, and intentional infliction of grievous bodily harm with life-threatening consequences." She paused for a moment, then read clearly. Sentence: life imprisonment. No parole. Ramsey didn't cry, didn't resist, didn't plead. He simply closed his eyes, as if his life had just touched the inevitable end he had always seen coming, but had never dared to face until it reached his ears. Briggs turned to Morell. "Officer Trent Morell," her voice dropped a level. "You directly caused unconscious injury to the victim, deliberately disabled your body camera, participated in 7 unlawful seizures, and played a central role in the assault of Nyla Jericho." She read his sentence: life imprisonment, plus 20 years for obstructing a federal investigation. Morell collapsed into the seat, his chest heaving like someone had cut off his breath. There was no trace of the man who once pinned others to the ground with his knee. Only a prisoner curled in his jumpsuit. Briggs turned to Cray. The courtroom stretched thin, the air itself feeling like it might crack. "Captain Marcus Cray," Briggs said, her tone calm but weighted like a blade hitting the table. "You are responsible for organizing R7, ordering camera blackouts, coercing staff to alter access logs, covering up 3 military-related deaths, and threatening subordinates." Cray raised his head, clinging to one last hope. Briggs extinguished it instantly. "You are sentenced to 35 years in federal prison. No eligibility for reduction." His mouth opened, but no sound came out. The steel mask of the man who once moved in the shadows was gone, leaving behind only the shell of someone who now knew he would grow old behind bars. Kessler stood in the back, arms crossed, as if locking in the end of a battle she had watched for too long. Malik sat in the gallery, his face unmoved but his eyes dark and deep like cold water receding after a storm. He looked at Ramsey, then Morell, then Cray, not with anger, not with triumph, but with the quiet confirmation that what Nyla endured had not disappeared into the void. Briggs continued. "For the owner of the garage, used for VIN scrubbing, the court issues a sentence of 18 years. For the 5 officials involved in data tampering, the court sentences each to between 8 and 12 years. A few people in the courtroom exhaled, not out of relief, but because the federal court's hammer had landed on every pressure point the R7 network once used to survive for years. But Briggs was not finished. She turned to the final page of the file, and her voice took on a new edge. "And due to the scale of R7's reach, the number of staff involved, the level of system-wide cover-up, and the risk of recurrence if the environment that allowed it to happen is not dismantled. Briggs paused, looked once more at the defendant's bench, then out over the entire courtroom. Her voice was steel. This court formally requests that the United States Department of Justice partially dissolve the City Police Department. Unquote. A ripple of gasps and shifting chairs spread through the room. No one could believe what they were hearing. A court clerk whispered, This has never happened before." A young agent's eyes widened. "Dissolving a city agency? This sets a precedent." Briggs struck her gavel to regain order. "This order takes effect immediately. A federal inspection team will assume oversight today. All personnel connected to the R7 operation are required to step down from duty." Is candidation? Cray looked around like an animal surrounded by fire, unable to grasp how fast everything had collapsed. Ramsey bowed his head, gripping his metal cuffs as if trying to hold on to anything that remained. Morrell trembled so hard the chair beneath him rattled. Nyla sat still. She didn't smile. The room looked at her like the epicenter of this quake. The woman who had turned one night of pain in a dark garage into the largest trial in the city's history. Kessler placed a hand gently on her shoulder, light but firm, enough for Nyla to know she was not alone. Briggs closed the file and brought down the gavel to end the session. Justice cannot return what was taken, but it can stop the hand that tries to take again. This court is adjourned. And as everyone rose, it was clear to all that the sound of the gavel did more than close a case. It ended an era of silence. That evening, after the trial, Malik and Nyla's small house was wrapped in a silence neither of them was used to. There were no ICU monitors beeping, no hurried footsteps from agents, no clicking cuffs, no gavels pounding, no shouting from the courtroom. Only the soft sound of Nyla's breathing on the sofa and the kettle warming on the stove. Malik stood by the window, looking out at the familiar dark street, the same street he had walked down hundreds of times, never imagining it would one day feel more unsettling than a battlefield. He didn't check his phone, didn't turn on the TV, didn't speak. He looked at Nyla and saw her body trying to heal. But he also saw something in her eyes that had not disappeared after the trial, the feeling that someone was still watching them from behind. As Malik prepared to lock the front door for the night, he saw something on the porch. A white envelope. No sender. No stamp. Nothing but a stiff sheet tucked inside, placed too neatly, too clean. Malik bent down to pick it up. He didn't hear metal, didn't feel the tension of a trap. But what made him pause was the envelope's surface. No fingerprints, no sign that it had been touched by anyone. He brought it inside, set it on the table, and switched on the lamp. Nyla looked up, her gaze alert. "What is that?" Malik shook his head. "I don't know. But someone wanted us to see it." He opened the envelope with the tip of a thin blade, so gently the paper didn't tear at the edge. Inside was a slim file, only a few pages, neatly fastened. The title on the cover drained the light from the room, like someone had pulled the air out of it. Project Rise Case File. Jericho Cluster, Internal Only. Nyla looked at the title, then at Malik, as if her whole body had tightened in a single breath. Malik turned to the first page. A list appeared. No detailed descriptions, no timestamps of death, just names, ranks, and 2 words in parentheses, suicide. But Nyla's eyes froze on the first number. 12. 12 black service members. 12 deaths filed under the same heading. 12 stories no one had asked about. Malik turned another page. A name in the middle of the list caught in Nyla's throat. Darius Cole. She put a hand to her mouth when she saw it. Darius Cole had been Malik's friend in the Special Forces, the man who once pulled him from a collapsed house after a blast in Basra. He had been reported as suicide 3 years ago, but Malik had never believed it. The reason given: unstable mental state. No further investigation. No family inquiry. No case reopened. Malik stared at the page like looking into a darkness he thought he had left behind years ago. The word suicide beside Darius's name felt like a dull blade scraping stone, not paper. Nyla asked quietly, "What do you think this is?" Malik exhaled slowly. A warning. Or a call for help. Maybe both. Nyla touched the edge of the file. "Who sent it?" Malik didn't answer right away. He knew this kind of delivery. No fingerprints, no stamp, no handwriting, only intention. The kind where the sender didn't want to be known, but very much wanted the recipient to understand that this file didn't end up in their hands by accident. At the back of the folder was one final page, a single typed line. The garage case was just the surface. Rise is reopening. Nyla moved closer, her hand finding Malik's. He looked at her and saw that the fear from her early days in the ICU was gone. What was left was clarity. The understanding that this world did not stop with the 3 names sentenced today. Rise wasn't just a criminal ring, Cray controlled. It was something bigger, older, stretching from military zones to civilian life, from battlefield shadows to the dark corners of this very city. Malik closed the file. "We can't ignore this." Nyla looked at him, her voice low. "And we can't turn back now." Asses due in place service 7. As the clock inside struck midnight, the streetlight outside flickered once, then blinked off for half a second, like a short circuit. Malik looked out the window instinctively, like someone who had survived war. Across the street, beneath the shadow of an old tree, stood a still figure. Not a passerby, not someone smoking, not someone standing there by chance. He was positioned exactly where he could see into Malik's house. When Malik looked straight at him, the figure didn't run. He simply raised a hand and lightly tapped behind his ear, the exact place where comms equipment is worn during military operations. Malik stepped toward the window, his back tense like a steel cable. The shadowed figure tilted his head slightly, as if to confirm Malik had seen him. Then a voice came through the device he was holding, loud enough to carry across the short distance. "Jericho. Ready for next phase." Malik didn't move. The figure outside took one step back, then disappeared into the night, as if stepping through a door only he could see. No sound of a car. No footsteps. No trace. Nyla came to his side, her hand resting on his back. "Who was that?" Malik didn't turn. "Someone who used to be on the inside. Or someone who stood above men like Cray." Nyla looked at the envelope lying on the table. "So?" Malik placed his hand on the file. "No. This is just the beginning. Too straight." Outside, the air had stilled again. But it wasn't the quiet of a night after trial. It was the silence before a second storm rolled in. Rise didn't end when the courtroom doors closed. It only changed floors, changed shape, changed targets. And now, the people at the center of that storm carried the name Jericho. The trial had ended one network, but the shadow of Rise had just opened its next chapter. And the person who sent that envelope had made one thing very clear. Malik was no longer a bystander. He had just been called into the next phase.